Hello and welcome to another edition of In the State House. I'm Alan Macdonald and I'm here with Senator Jason Lewis and Representative Michael Day for a chance to talk about what's going on in the State House, because there's quite a bit. We're in the middle of budget season. We're in the middle of public hearings on a great many issues. And thank you, gentlemen, for joining to talk with me about these.
Thanks for having us back.
Thank you, Alan.
Okay, well, we have so many things to talk about, but I know that there's been a tremendous amount of attention on healthcare issues in this season, and it's got to do with the governor just recently signing a bill on restrictions on prescription on opioids for a certain amount, and a lot of other issues, and I know you've both been involved in it. So I thought if you could help it be explained to the public, it would be a very good thing.
Sure. I'll jump in first, and Rep. Day's been, I've been a leader on this effort as well for a long time, and you serve on the Mental Health and Substance Abuse Committee as well. So we'll both have a lot to say here. But we all recognize that we've had a real crisis in the state and around the country when it comes to abuse of prescription painkillers and heroin. And it's just been so tragic to see the overdoses and the deaths that have resulted in all of our communities, really. So the legislature's really been trying to tackle this for several years now, focusing on trying to improve funding for education programs, prevention, and treatment, as well as recovery supports. The most recent legislation, and this really, I think, was a collaborative effort between the legislature, Governor Baker, Attorney General Healy, as well as our communities, community partners, I think is being described as really a landmark piece of legislation that's going to be a model around the country. And it does a lot of different things to try to, again, around prevention, treatment, and recovery. For example, first-time opioid prescriptions will now be limited to 7 days because we're trying to reduce the number of pills that are in circulation. There'll also be more training for physicians and nurses and dentists around alternative pain management treatments. And for the first time, we'll be introducing a screening program in our schools, which has been proven to be very effective at helping identify young people that are at risk of substance abuse and other risky behaviors, so we can try to get them help earlier in the process.
That was very helpful. I know you are the chairman of the Senate side on the public health financing level, and I know that brings you into these discussions. It's much more a situation across a lot of the social worker and public safety and medical circumstances, I know. So you really are involved in it a lot.
Well, it's a public health issue that cuts across. Our community hospitals are all involved, of course, and we have a wonderful coalition here in Winchester locally, the Coalition for a Safer Community, that's been very active. But it takes teamwork for because it's such a challenging problem.
Right.
Yeah, this is I was going to say to kind of dovetail off that. This is as we've talked about before, a problem that cuts across not just service providers, but across income levels, across race, any kind of category you can imagine. This affects everyone, and it's devastating our town. I know you're active, and thank you for your involvement in the task force that Marion Ryan and Senator Lewis, the DA and Senator Lewis, are chairing. But this is an all-hands-on-deck type of issue. So I'm really thrilled with the bill that we did pass, and as Senator Lewis said, it was a compromise bill. The governor came out with certain recommendations. We did quite a bit of work on it on the Mental Health and Substance Abuse Committee, on which I sit, and came out with I think, a very good bill that is going to be a national model. The CDC has already taken some of our restrictions on the opioid prescriptions and incorporated them into their guidelines going forward. So it's already having a ripple effect outside the Commonwealth, which is great. But as I've said before, this is a first step. It's an important step, but it's the first step where we need to go from here. The education components of this bill are really what attracted me to the work on it. It's, as Senator Lewis said, we're for the first time requiring ongoing education for physicians, for dentists, on the opioid problem. I was shocked to hear some testimony from folks saying, yeah, I'm a doctor, I've got my license, but they were never trained on pain management. They were never trained on these opioids, and these are some of the most powerful drugs in the world that are being prescribed, and they don't really have a good grasp on the after effects of these things and how addictive they are. So that piece was really attractive to me. The other piece is also, in addition to the screening, is more education in the schools. The MIAA, the Athletic Association now, will be required to put out more training materials. And that's, again, a first step. We've kind of led them to the water, and now it's time for everyone to really get going on this piece. But it's a great bill. I was very happy with it. Obviously, a compromise bill, so some things that I wanted in there weren't in there, but overall, I think it's a fantastic piece of legislation.
And I wanted to add, I really liked the op-ed column that you had in the local papers. I saw it in the Winchester Star this week, where you really focused in on mental health, because so many of the times that substance use disorder is really indicative of an underlying mental health condition, behavioral health. Yeah. And you were really focusing and calling for additional steps that we need to take to address mental health needs. Yeah,
I think a lot of this is things that are uncomfortable to talk about. Mental health is not something that we talk about in normal conversation, and I think we need to. We've got to remove the stigma. As I said in the column, my family's impacted by it. I think just about everyone's family is. Right. And so to keep this in the shadows is not doing us a service, not allowing us to move forward as a society.
To me, that's one of the most impressive things about the work you're doing right now, and that went through the governor signing the legislation that you passed. And it's about education, as you said, Representative. And I think it snuck up on even the healthcare community a little bit here. We saw the numbers of deaths, and of course there's many, many more who are just affected by it, not just the deaths, but it has accelerated so much in the last couple of years that it's gotten the attention on the healthcare side, sure enough. But right through the entire system that you're so involved in, and I know from hearing the discussions at the task force level, as I said a little earlier, from the social worker side right through the public safety and court system, but not as a criminal matter as much as an education and helping out those who come into the system because they've been drawn in by opioid use.
Right.
Yeah, I think criminalizing addiction is a method that was tried and failed largely. Obviously, one of the pieces we passed earlier this year was increasing penalties related to fentanyl. Fentanyl's an additive. That's what dealers use to cut heroin. It's very powerful and very deadly. And so we did take that step earlier this year to increase the penalties for fentanyl possession. So it's a multi-pronged approach that we need to take, but the education piece is a huge one.
And we are trying to strike the right balance here, because you're right, with something like fentanyl, which is so deadly and it's causing a lot of these overdose deaths, we are trying to reduce, make sure people don't traffic in that. But at the same time, we also just passed legislation in the House and Senate that's on the governor's desk now, which would correct something that has been in our laws for 20 years, which was that if you get convicted of possession of a drug, or you lose your driver's license in many cases. So now people might serve 6 months or a year, come back in the community, and now they can't get a job because it's difficult for them to get around. So, we just actually repealed that, and hopefully the governor will sign it. But that's, we're trying to both provide the treatment and the care that people need, as well as find alternatives to just locking people up, and then they can't be productive citizens.
Yeah, the diversion programs are hugely important. When I was in the DA's office, we had what they call drug court. They still have it. We're trying to increase that now, and it's a diversion program. If you're, in a bad way, or you're suffering from substance use disorder, putting somebody in jail as a result of that doesn't work. And so the drug court allows people to keep their record clean if they follow through with rehab and a program moving forward. So those types of diversionary programs are huge. But again, it is striking the balance, because you don't want to reward or even allow people to get a pass when they're engaging in trafficking, when they're drug dealing, things like that.
Well, you are becoming more and more important in this area of healthcare, but also the healthcare system itself, and we know that there's a report by the Health Policy Commission on community hospitals at the crossroads, and as we've just talked about now, it's really so much more than hospital care. It really is community care, and we need to find a way to make sure that we're able to sustain those services at the community level.
Yeah, and again, I applaud you for the work that you're doing over at Hallmark, but I know Senator Lewis's work has been so important in this area of preventative health. Not preventative health, but healthcare.
Preventative disease, for sure. But there's so much about preventative that you're right, but it's really now in the healthcare industry, it seems to me, more positive about wellness and recognizing ways to get ahead of the disease situation. But it's not hospital care as much as it is reaching out into the community itself.
That's right, and our community hospitals and community health centers, like Hallmark Health. For our viewers who don't know, you are the CEO of Hallmark Health. Is they're on critical front lines and very well positioned to do that, but it's a different model for you because you're not getting reimbursed for hospital beds and procedures. It's work you're doing in the community to reduce incidence of type 2 diabetes and to bring down blood pressure and reduce strokes and asthma rates in kids, and you do that with partners in the community, and that's why we're changing the payment system for healthcare. But it's a difficult transition to make, and we need to make sure our community hospitals like Hallmark and Winchester Hospital, which is part of Leahy now, can continue to thrive. And we know that's a big challenge. And we've got to help you make that transition successfully.
Yeah, because you have an infrastructure that's built up over generations, of course, on the idea that if you needed health care, you would come to a facility that would provide it.
Yep.
Now we want to provide it at the home, in the community, in so many other areas, and it's more exciting. It's actually energized the people in the system quite a bit. But you're right, trying to match up with the public policy, the payment scale, and the services themselves is a pretty big task, pretty big challenge at the moment, but it's an exciting one. And I have to say that the help we're getting from the legislative side to really look at this, very, very important.
Good.
Very important, John.
Good to hear.
And it is. I mean, it's just true. And education itself, and you've been involved in a lot of that this year too, because we're talking about the exam situation and the funding, of course, and charter school versus non-charter school. There's so much going on in public education. That we're talking about healthcare education, but the general education, so important to the community. We'll see what happens with it. I know that you'll have a lot coming before you in that situation. I don't know if you want to talk about things that are going to be on the ballot this fall, or whether they fall into this kind of a category, but it might be early because even though some folks may be watching this not exactly as we're filming it, but we're a few months ahead of the general election, but there will be some ballot issues potentially for the statewide ballot.
Right, and one of them could be related to healthcare pricing and disparities between hospitals like Partners and our community hospitals, but although the legislature is trying to work out a solution on that issue, so maybe to not have it be on the ballot. Another one related to schools is the very controversial issue around charter schools. And whether there should be maintain a cap on the number of schools, or whether that should be lifted. And the state Senate is actually working right now, as we sit here today, to see if there's a way to craft a bill that could be a compromise between charter school proponents and opponents. It's threading a needle, but I'm anticipating we'll see some legislation maybe within the next 2 weeks, and then we'll have to see how far that goes in the legislature and whether the governor would agree to it. But we would prefer, I think, in general, it would be better not to have a multi-million-dollar divisive battle over charter schools on the ballot in November if we can help it.
Yeah, one of the concerns I've had, and actually voiced to the governor during the hearing on charter schools, was how we evaluate them. The charter school first came into effect in the Education Reform Act 20-some odd years ago, and my question is, we say that they're in for innovation, and that they're in to essentially set up competition with the public schools, but those to me are incongruous. They're either there to innovate and push out new measures to our public schools, or they're there to compete, and you measure those two issues differently. And that's one of the struggles I've had with this issue, is how are we measuring what charters are doing, and what is their purpose, what's their role in our educational system. And I haven't really been satisfied with some of the answers I've heard on that, so it's a tricky one for sure. And I'll be interested to see what the Senate rolls out. The Senate's taking the lead this time on the legislation. The House took the lead last time, where before I was in, it died Was the governor veto it?
Well, it was a very unusual situation. The bill actually passed the House and then was taken up in the Senate,
right.
but voted down.
That's right.
Which happens very rarely, because usually bills that don't have majority support never actually get to the floor.
Yeah.
But this was a case where it did, and it was actually voted down. So that tells you something about how difficult this issue is.
Yeah.
But I think everyone generally agrees, whether they're for it or against, wherever they stand on this, that it would be better if the legislature could work out, because I think everyone agrees there are some reforms that are needed to how we govern charter schools and the ability for communities to have some local say over the forming charter schools. And the funding has been a big challenge, because we worry that it drains funding away from the traditional public schools. But we know there also are some communities and parents that really want the option, so it's trying to strike the right balance.
Okay.
So stay tuned on that one.
Stay tuned on that one. So let's talk about another major issue that's been in the press, almost seems like every day, with the MBTA. And we had a very fortunate winter. So last winter we were sitting here talking about the unbelievable situation they were working under. And now a better winter, but still a lot of discussion about budget and projects. And how do you see where we're going? This is of great interest to the community, with the Green Line extension potential and fares in general, to keep the system running. What's the future going to be for us with the MBTA?
We've got good news and bad news, right? I suppose is the way you always deal with the T with those discussions. But I had, we gave the governor the fiscal board the authority that he wanted to kind of address the T in his way, and we gave him that authority this year. And I was frankly pretty disappointed in the first recommendations coming out of the advisory board being a cut in services and an increase in fares. When you give him that when you give that board this wide-ranging authority, those are the two things that come out of the chute. And I said, we got to be doing better than this. And so I voiced I know Senator Lewis had also voiced his displeasure with that as well. We're meeting tomorrow, matter of fact, with the Secretary of Transportation legislators to talk about the fare increases, to talk about the cut in services. On the flip side, we had great news that the Winchester station, which hasn't been addressed since I was born, I think, and as we all know is crumbling, the downtown station. We've been working very hard, and members of the community here, on moving that forward. So it's got to go through different design phases, and we've just passed the 15% design phase. We've moved on to the 30% now, which is a landmark in the process. And I'll turn the good news over to Senator Lewis.
Well, as Representative Day said, it's been a priority here in the community for years now to rehabilitate, or basically rebuild, the Winchester Center commuter rail station. We did make some improvements to the Wedgmere station a few years ago, which were not good, but the Winchester Center is really our flagship station, and it's a centerpiece of our downtown as well. So it's important not just for public transportation, but also as a economic development catalyst for the community. For example, the Waterfield lot, once we redevelop the station, we can redevelop that lot as well. So we finally locked in on the design, which has taken us years to get there. It's been very challenging, and the community has been working closely with the MBTA, and we've got that. But the good news is it does appear that in the MBTA's 5-year capital plan, that we will be in there for the construction funding, which has not been in place up till now. So that still needs to get voted on and approved by the MassDOT board, but we do anticipate that. So hopefully that's very good news for us to get that project done in the next 2 to 3 years.
These things take time.
So, yes, and we hope it'll last that long, because we had a huge hole open up on the platform last winter. We've had concrete falling from, so it's safe to use. We've made, the MBTA has done temporary repairs, but those won't last.
We're going to work on relocating the pigeon sanctuary as well. So it's safe to walk under as well.
The pigeon sanctuary was something we never envisioned. We didn't think about that.
But it wouldn't, when that's all rebuilt, I think not only would we have a modern, safe, fully accessible station, but I think it's going to be wonderful for continuing to develop the downtown, with the new zoning we have, with putting more housing in the downtown and attracting more businesses. I think it'll be a very big help. Yeah,
and we brought Secretary Jay Ash out here a few months ago, just on a walking tour of downtown Winchester. to let them, the Secretary of Housing and Economic Development,
Sure.
and to show him exactly what we've been doing in our town. So the high school renovation, the rezoning of the areas, and the MBTA piece is another third prong of that that's hugely important. And he was, I think he was very impressed with the amount of work that the town itself has undertaken. And part of the goal of that was to say, we've gotten this far. We need some help to go a little farther, some partnerships with the state, and I think we'll have hopefully some good success in that.
Right, for that Waterfield project,
Waterfield
which is where the Chamber of Commerce building is now, which would get torn down as part of this rebuild. Is we're hoping maybe we'll get a state grant to help with the infrastructure that needs to go on, so that then a private developer can come in and develop that into some retail and then some housing.
Yeah, jumpstart it.
That's great. Well, the state's been involved in this for a century, really, because the early, as we know from that train line going through at the street level in the 1800s, there was discussion immediately about how we're going to change that either underground or overground. Underground didn't work for lots of reasons, but the state was very helpful back in the 50s, as we know, to get behind it, and the fact that you're bringing them back in, very, very important.
Yeah.
And it's going to be just what you say, very, very important to downtown and the whole community.
Absolutely.
So we have so many issues that are about local projects and things that are happening. You might want to talk a little bit, as you just started to, frankly. There are other things I know that we are working with the Department of Energy on, or we're working with different kinds of elements at the state level, and you are the link to all those good things. So I don't know if you want. I don't know if there's any news for things that we're working on. But
well, I'll let Rep. Day share the new news. But just as context, the EverSource, the utility, is looking to put 2 major electrical transmission lines through our region, including through parts of Winchester, and we've been very concerned for a long time now about how they've come up with the routes for those and whether they're fully understanding all the concerns of the communities, whether that's safety issues, health issues, traffic issues. So we've continued to push them. The town of Winchester now has 2 consultants on board, which will really help, I think, navigate these issues with EverSource, and the members of the community that are the neighborhoods that are most impacted have really been very active, and we appreciate all the input they've been giving to us and to the town. So in addition to working with EverSource and the Energy Facilities Siting Board, there's also another step we've taken, which I'll let Rep. Day talk about.
Yeah, so Senator Lewis and I co-sponsored legislation in the House and the Senate to basically require the Energy Facilities Siting Board to take into account more than just the bottom dollar line. When I got elected in November, and the first thing that landed on my plate before I even got sworn in was this project. And Senator Lewis and I and other area legislators had written to ISO New England, which is the independent service operator that makes the decisions on how the power grid is managed here, and encouraged them to choose an alternative project that would have run under the ocean, come aboard in Lynn, and then run through a series of rail beds and bike paths down to Everett. ISO essentially said, no, we're going with the EverSource project. And one of the disappointments I had with that decision was that they looked at the bottom line cost, and that was pretty much it. There was some other reliability concerns they had, but really the motivating factor there was the dollar. And it didn't take into account the impact that this is going to have on our communities. So we're tearing up our main streets, and it's a giant project coming through. So, as Senator Luce said, it's now at the Energy Facilities Siting Board, the EFSB. We put in legislation in the State House now that says when you're considering whether to approve this type of project or not, you've got to take into account environmental concerns, neighborhood concerns, the personal cost, really. And it's not a NIMBY issue. It's not a not in my backyard issue. It's really requiring the EFSB to say there's more here than just what's the bottom line cost. There's an impact on the community, there's an impact on health, there's an impact on environment, and this legislation, if we can get it through, would put that into the equation. Right now they look at the dollar
Yeah, because for example, we're not saying that we don't need lines like this to ensure we have reliable power. We know how important that is. But if you know, rather than taking the most direct route, maybe it's a little bit cheaper, but if you could go a slightly different route that maybe would go down some roads or some ways that would have fewer residences, fewer businesses that would be impacted, you know, maybe that does cost a little bit more, but we think that that needs to be weighed and that needs to be given equal, you know, at least equal weight to the cost.
What would you think the timetable on this might be? Is there a way to guess at it? I mean, how urgent is it for the utility folks?
Yeah, the proposal on the plate now is that that start construction, I believe, in 16 next year. Next year, 2017. We're in 16 now. So that start construction next year. It's currently before the EFSB. Winchester has intervened as a party. Stoneham has intervened as a party. That's another route it's going through. And so that process is underway now with a hearing officer. I believe they are looking at, I think it's a July or August deadline, and then making a decision fairly soon after that.
And that would be a decision on exactly the route, that these two lines could follow, and also getting into what the mitigation would have to be to ensure the health and safety of the communities.
Well, that's very helpful, because I know there's been a lot of local discussion about it, so that's very helpful.
Yeah, we've had a few well-attended public meetings over at the McCall.
Yes, and I must say the Board of Selectmen and Richard Howe, the town manager, have been very active on this issue as well, very engaged in it. So I think we're really trying to work together with the neighborhoods that are most impacted to try to address the concerns.
That's great. Well, we only have a few minutes left. That's how fast this goes. But I know you've done a number of things that we didn't get to talk about. You had a nice meeting recently about conversations on elder issues with the Mystic Valley Elder Services and the Minuteman Social Services. Housing issues or other things that might have come up in that discussion. Is there anything immediate that we should be knowing about in those conversations?
You know, we just, we know the population's aging. It's great news. People are living longer. We go to 100th birthday parties now. Rep. Day and I fairly regularly. It's a wonderful thing. But it does put new challenges. We want our seniors to be able to live at home as long as they can. Back to the community health discussion we had, which means you need good home care services. You need the supports. You need transportation for seniors. They're not driving anymore. And housing, having the right housing options. So we talked about all those issues, and we had Secretary Alice Bonner, who's the Governor's Secretary for Elder Affairs, who herself is a geriatric nurse. So she's a great addition to the team, and she was there with us at that forum.
Okay. We've put in some, I signed onto a letter requesting more funding for our councils on aging as well in this budget coming up. So we'll have some spirited budget debate coming up, but I think you know, Senator Lewis said, our population is aging. We're not, you know, I'm one of 7. In my family, families aren't that big anymore. And so, you know, as we get older, we're not kind of filling the ranks behind. And so we need to devote more resources to the aging population and have a smarter way of approaching how we provide those services.
And the good news is something like home care is actually much less expensive than nursing homes. So it isn't just about spending more money, it's spending the money in a smarter way. And most seniors would rather stay at home, you know, than go into a nursing home, but you need the right supports to enable them to do so.
Well, now that we saved all that money on less snow plowing this winter, we know that there'll be plenty of resources available to take care of all these things. We know
I love the optimism there.
I know they're very, very difficult. Well, so much appreciated that you're able to spend this time with us. It's an educational piece for me and for the community, and it's a great pleasure to have you gentlemen here in the State House, and we'll look forward to the next session as well.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's always been a pleasure here.
Great. Also, I want to say this is Alan Macdonald, and I want to thank Senator Jason Lewis and Representative Michael Day for joining us, and thank you for joining us for this session, and we'll look forward to seeing you very soon. Thank you.